I never thought that a simple surgery, something the doctors called routine, would be the beginning of my real heartbreak. I woke up groggy, my mouth dry and my fingers cold against the stiff hospital blanket. The first thing I saw wasn't a nurse or the kind face of my son. It was a text message. Just one line. "Sorry, Mom. Money's tight and you probably won't last much longer anyway. I sold your house and the car." My vision blurred. I thought it was the anesthesia messing with me. But I read it again. And again. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard, I thought the monitors would scream. I kept trying to blink it away, like maybe if I closed my eyes tight enough the words would disappear. But they didn't. I lay there, the antiseptic smell clawing at my throat, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor that seemed to echo louder with every beat. Betrayal. The kind that rots you from the inside out. I remembered every night I stayed up waiting for him to come home as a teenager, every lunch I packed, every bill I scraped to pay after his father left us. I used to believe love would anchor us, that no matter how much we drifted, we'd find each other again. But love without respect is just a loaded gun. And today, he pulled the trigger. I wanted to scream, to tear out the IV line, to call him and demand an explanation. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pressed them to my chest, trying to hold in all the noise. The grief, the rage, the humiliation that boiled beneath my skin. He sold my house, my home, the place where I planted roses the year he was born, the kitchen where I taught him to scramble eggs, the bedroom where I once whispered every prayer I knew for his safety. And he sold my car too, my last piece of freedom. I wasn't just losing a roof and four wheels. I was losing the story of my life, chapter by chapter, all in one gutting moment. A nurse came in, chirping about breakfast options, and I turned away. I didn't want eggs. I didn't want oatmeal. I wanted to wake up in a world where my son hadn't just betrayed me for a fistful of dollars. I thought I had already survived my worst days. But as I lay there with my son's words burning in my mind, I realized my real fight was just beginning. I tried to call him. My finger stumbled across the screen, trembling so violently that I almost dropped the phone. But every time I pressed call, it went straight to voicemail. I sent a message. "Why? Where will I go? Please, answer me." Nothing. I called again and again, blocked. It felt like I had slipped into a bad dream. A nurse came in to check my vitals, cheerful as ever, her rubber soles squeaking across the floor. I watched her move around my bed, adjusting tubes, charting numbers, as if the ground beneath me hadn't just fallen away. "Are you okay? Can I get you anything?" she asked, glancing at my pale face. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I shook my head. I wanted to tell her that my son had gutted my life in a single transaction, that when they wheeled me out of this building, I had no place to go. No porch to step onto, no keys to turn in a lock. I thought about the rose bushes out front, the ones I used to prune every spring. I could almost smell them, soft and wild. I thought about my rocking chair by the window, the one I sat in when I waited for him to come home at night, when he was still mine, when he still called me Mama instead of Mom. I looked down at my hands, the skin thin and wrinkled. I had carried him in these arms, cleaned, skinned knees, held him through chickenpox, cradled his broken heart when that first girl left him. And now he had left me. I turned to the small tray beside my bed. There was a paper cup with pills I couldn't remember asking for. I swallowed them dry. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming for hours. The nurse put a hand on my arm, a kindness that almost made me sob. When she left, I stared out the window at the hospital parking lot below. Cars came and went, families reunited, visitors carrying balloons and flowers. And me? I was just an old woman in a paper gown, crying quietly into a pillow that didn't belong to me. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of waking up tomorrow and realizing I had nowhere left to belong. I didn't know then that this was the moment I stopped being a mother in his eyes. But it was also the moment I began to become something else, someone else. The next morning I woke up with the same question scraping at my bones. How could he do this? I lay there listening to the beeping of the machines, the shuffle of nurses in the hallway, the low hum of someone's television in another room. All that noise, and still I felt like I was floating in an empty cave. I thought maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he got scammed. Maybe someone tricked him. But deep down, I knew better. A young social worker came in to check on me. She had kind eyes, the kind that try to see your soul, without prying too hard. I asked her for help. A lawyer, any way to stop it. She looked at me, her face tightening into that polite pity I had started to recognize. Do you have any legal papers, ma'am? Did you sign over any power of attorney to your son? The words hit me like cold water. Power of attorney. I remembered it now. 2 years ago, after my first fall. He came to my hospital bed, his voice soft, telling me not to worry about bills or decisions. It's just so I can help you, Mom, he had said, his hand resting on mine like a promise. I was scared and drugged up, and I signed without reading. Because I trusted him. Because he was my boy. Now that signature had turned into the knife he drove into my back. I felt my throat tighten. I wanted to tear my own skin off just to escape the shame. How did I raise someone who saw me not as a mother, but as a burden he could cash out? The social worker squeezed my hand. It's okay to feel angry. You're not alone in this. We can try to see what options you have. Options. The word sounded so empty. My options used to be what color to paint the kitchen, what flowers to plant in spring. Now it meant choosing between shelters and temporary housing, between lawyers and cold benches. I turned my face to the wall and closed my eyes. In that dark space behind my eyelids, I saw it all again. My son's first steps across our living room, the birthday cakes I baked, the hugs at every graduation. Each memory twisted now, a rope tightening around my ribs. I wasn't just grieving my house or my car. I was grieving the last shreds of the boy I thought I knew. And lying there in that sterile room, I realized something that almost stopped my heart. He didn't love me. Not really. Not the way I loved him. Not enough to protect me. I stayed awake all night after that, staring at the ceiling, replaying every small moment that led to this betrayal. That was the night I stopped waiting for him to save me, and started imagining how I would save myself. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. Every tray the nurses brought me felt like a stranger sitting on my lap, asking me to pretend life was normal. But then Martha called. Martha, my old friend from church. The woman who sat next to me every Sunday, squeezing my hand when we sang the hymns. She had moved 2 towns over after her husband died, but she always called on my birthday. Always remembered my roses. She heard about my hospital stay from a mutual friend. When she called, I tried to keep my voice strong, to say I was fine, but my words spilled out like water from a cracked pot. I have nowhere to go, I finally confessed, the words tasting like blood in my mouth. There was silence on the other end. Then, Martha's voice, strong and unwavering. You're coming to me, that's final. I felt my knees buckle under that simple kindness, even though I was lying in bed. The social worker helped arrange my discharge. She packed my few clothes into a plastic bag. A nurse tied my hair back like I was a child, and I felt that old humiliation sting my cheeks again. When Martha arrived at the hospital lobby, she stood there in her soft cardigan, holding a big thermos of tea and a hand-knitted scarf. Her eyes went straight to mine, not to my hospital bracelets, not to the sadness on my face, just to me. She didn't ask questions right away, just wrapped that scarf around my shoulders and hugged me so tight I thought my bones would crack. In her car, I watched the city blur by, the grocery stores, the gas stations, the side streets where I used to take my son for ice cream. All of it looked like a different planet now. When we pulled into her driveway, I saw a small guest room window with lace curtains, a porch swing, flower pots that needed watering. It wasn't my house, but it wasn't a shelter either. She led me inside, her arm strong under mine. This is your room, she said, patting the quilt. Put your bag down. You're home for as long as you need. I sat on the edge of that guest bed, my hands twisting in my lap. Martha bustled around, making tea, fluffing pillows, chattering about small things to keep the silence away. For the first time since that text, I felt something slip into my chest, a tiny flicker of hope. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how to fight back, or if I could ever reclaim what I lost. But that night, under Martha's roof, wrapped in a borrowed quilt and breathing in the smell of chamomile tea, I realized I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe that was the first small crack in the wall my son had tried to build around me. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to let the light back in. I woke up in Martha's guest room to the smell of bacon and cinnamon. For a second, I thought I was home. My real home, the one he sold without a blink. Then I saw the lace curtains, the little bookshelf filled with romance novels, the quilt I didn't recognize. Martha called me to the kitchen with a gentle knock. I shuffled out, my legs still weak, my mind heavier than my bones. We ate in silence at first. She watched me with soft eyes, like she was waiting for me to break. I wanted to, but something inside me was holding all my pieces together by sheer force. After breakfast, I found my old phone and started scrolling through my photos. There he was, my son at 12, proudly holding up a science fair ribbon. Us at the lake, fishing poles tangled together, because he didn't have the patience to wait for the fish to bite. His college graduation, that fragile smile I thought meant pride. Every swipe felt like a knife. Each memory was another reminder of what I lost, not just a house or a car, but the story I thought we were writing together. I thought of the rose garden in the front yard, the way I used to sit outside in the evenings, trimming dead petals and humming old hymns, how he used to help me, digging small holes for new bulbs, even though he always complained about the dirt. I decided I needed to see it one last time, to say goodbye to the woman I had been in that house. Martha offered to drive me. I shook my head. I needed to do it alone. I dressed slowly, my hands still unsure, as if my body wasn't quite mine anymore. Before I left, Martha squeezed my shoulder. "Go," she said, "but don't let the past chain you there." I took a taxi to my old street. When the car turned the corner, my breath caught in my throat. My house, stood there looking smaller somehow, almost embarrassed to be seen by me. Strangers were carrying boxes inside. A moving truck idled at the curb. One man wrestled with my old rocking chair, the one I rocked him in when he had fevers. I didn't get out right away. Just sat in the back seat, clutching my purse so hard my knuckles turned white. Finally, I stepped out and sat on a park bench across the street. I watched them fill the house with their laughter and their ugly plastic bins. I wondered if they'd ever feel the love I stitched into those walls, the prayers I whispered in every room. I sat there until the sun shifted and the new owners closed the front door. Then, in that quiet moment, I realized something that scared me as much as it freed me. That house wasn't mine anymore. And maybe, in some sharp and painful way, neither was he. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking. I turned away before I could change my mind. I didn't look back, not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew the only way forward was to start walking. When I got back to Martha's, she was in the garden, kneeling beside her tomato plants. She looked up and saw my face, and I didn't have to say a word. She just opened her arms. I dropped my purse on the walkway and fell into her hug. My body shook like it was trying to shake me loose from myself. Later, we sat at her kitchen table with mugs of weak tea, the afternoon light sliding across the linoleum floor like a slow wave. I kept turning my phone over in my hand. I scrolled past photos, past text threads that used to make me smile. All of them felt like fossils now, proof of a life that used to feel warm and whole. I wanted to call him again, to hear his voice, to demand an answer that might stitch up this gaping hole in my chest. But I stopped myself. I knew what he would say. That same cold shrug, that same mockery. "It's just property, Mom. You don't need it." He would never understand that it wasn't about walls or bricks. It was about respect, about trust, about every scraped knee I bandaged, every night I stayed awake listening for his keys in the door. Martha poured me another cup of tea. She moved carefully, like she was afraid I might shatter. "You need help," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. not just a bed or a meal. You need someone to fight for you. She pulled a business card from a drawer. Her cousin, a lawyer. Call him, she insisted. He knows these kinds of cases. You aren't powerless. You just feel that way because he wants you to. I stared at the card, the name blurred behind my tears. Powerless. That word had been circling my mind for weeks, gnawing at my spirit like a rat. I took a long breath and looked at Martha. Her eyes didn't waver. I realized in that moment that she saw me. Really saw me. Not as a burden, not as an obstacle, as a person. I nodded, my hand closing around the card like a lifeline. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark guest room, the moon pouring in like a silent witness. I thought about the woman I had been, quiet, giving, always smoothing over rough edges, always saying, "It's okay, I'll manage." But maybe it wasn't okay anymore. Maybe it was time to stop managing and start reclaiming. The ghost of me that had sat on that park bench today, she was fading. In her place, something new was starting to stand up inside me. Not rage, not revenge, resolve. The next morning, I called the lawyer. My hand hovered over the phone for a long time before I pressed the number. I felt like I was stepping onto a narrow bridge in a storm. Shaky, unsure if it would hold. When he answered, his voice was brisk, businesslike. "This is Robert." I opened my mouth, and for a second, nothing came out but air. Then, the words tumbled out in one ragged rush. The surgery, the text, the house, the car, the papers I signed without thinking. My voice sounded thin and foreign to me, like it belonged to some other frightened woman. There was silence on the line when I finished. I braced myself for pity. Or worse, indifference. But Robert didn't sigh or dismiss me. His voice was low, firm. "You are not as stuck as you think," he said. "If you were coerced or not in full capacity when you signed those papers, we can fight this. We can contest the sales. Fight." The word slid into my veins like a jolt of strong coffee. He explained the steps slowly, carefully. Medical records, proof of mental state, evidence of coercion. As he talked, I felt my breathing slow, my shoulders relaxed just a fraction. It wasn't a promise of a win. It wasn't even a promise of getting my house back. But it was a promise of being heard. When I hung up, Martha was waiting by the doorway with her dish towel bunched in her hands. She didn't ask what he said. She just stepped forward and squeezed my arms. "He'll help you," she said. "You deserve help." I looked at her, and for the first time since that hospital bed, I felt something like warmth spread across my chest. I wasn't just an old woman in a paper gown anymore. I wasn't a helpless mother waiting for crumbs of affection from a son who had already sold my life out from under me. I was a woman with a lawyer, with evidence, with a plan. That afternoon, Martha and I sat at her kitchen table, going through every paper I could find. Old medical files, bank statements, my battered folder of important documents. She made a list on a yellow notepad, her handwriting quick and sharp. It felt like we were patching up a sinking ship together, bucket by bucket. But for once, I didn't feel alone in the dark. That night, as I lay on the guest bed staring at the cracked ceiling, I heard my own voice echo in my head. If they loved you, they'd honor you. I finally understood. Quiet didn't mean weak. And love without respect? That wasn't love at all. Tomorrow, I would begin to fight. Even if my hands shook, even if my knees gave out, I was going to fight. For my house, for my name, for the woman I had nearly forgotten I could still be. The lawyer's office smelled like dust and old paper, the kind of place where secrets went to either die or be reborn. Robert sat behind a small, cluttered desk, glasses perched low on his nose. He didn't look at me like I was fragile. He looked at me like I was a client, someone with rights, not just a sad story. He shuffled my medical records, squinting at the dates. "Your surgery was a serious one," he said, tapping the page. "It would be easy to argue that you were under physical and mental duress when you signed that power of attorney." Duress. That word tasted strange on my tongue. He leaned back, folded his hands. "If we can show he manipulated you, that he acted in bad faith, We can contest the sale. We can freeze the proceeds before he drains the account. A chill ran down my spine. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. It was violence in a form no police would show up for. Robert handed me a list of documents to gather, bank statements, text messages, anything that could show the story behind the signatures. This will not be easy, he warned. It's not quick. It's not gentle. But it's possible. I nodded. My fingers gripped the paper so tight it wrinkled into my palm. I left his office with my heart pounding like I'd run a mile uphill. The sun outside felt too bright, too loud. People hurried past me on the sidewalk, carrying groceries, holding children's hands, laughing into phones. I wanted to scream at them. He sold my life while I was asleep in a hospital bed. But I didn't. I kept moving, step after step, each one a small defiance. When I got back to Martha's, she was waiting on the porch. I handed her the lawyer's list, my hands shaking. She read it slowly, her mouth a tight line. Then she looked up and smiled. "A fight it is," she said, "and you won't be fighting alone." That night, we sat in her kitchen, sorting documents into neat piles. I told her stories as we worked, about my old rose garden, about the first time my son rode a bike without training wheels, about the tiny birthday cakes I used to bake him. Each story felt like pulling a thorn from my skin. Martha didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes wet sometimes, her hands moving steady as a metronome. Before bed, I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was thin, my skin sagging in places that used to be smooth. But in my eyes, I saw something new. A spark. A hard, sharp edge I hadn't felt in decades. I realized then. My son had underestimated me. He thought he was stealing from a ghost. But I wasn't gone. I was still here. And I was coming for everything. I started staying up late. Martha would go to bed around 9, her door creaking shut with a soft click. I'd stay in the kitchen, a small lamp throwing a yellow pool of light across the table. That table became my battleground. Bank statements, medical records, old letters, my journals stacked on one side, sticky notes sprouting like weeds. I sorted them in silence, my breath the only sound. Each paper a shard of my past I refused to surrender. I felt like I was piecing together a shattered mirror, trying to find my face again in all the broken reflections. One night, around midnight, I sat back and rubbed my eyes. My fingers smelled like ink and old paper. I looked at the pile in front of me, evidence that I had been alive, present, aware, evidence that I wasn't some frail, confused woman who didn't know what she was signing. I thought about all those mornings I had woken up early to cook his favorite breakfast before school, the notes I slipped into his lunchbox. "You're strong. You're brave. I love you." I thought I was building a foundation. Turns out, I was building a rope he'd later use to hang me. A sudden wave of grief slammed into me. I pressed my forehead to the cool wood of the table and let the tears come. They slid down my face and pooled in the crook of my arm. I didn't cry for the house or the car. I cried for the boy I lost, long before he sold my keys to the highest bidder. I cried for every version of me that said, "It's okay, he didn't mean it." Every version that smoothed things over, stayed quiet, swallowed the sharp words. I didn't know how long I stayed like that. When I finally sat up, the kitchen was still and heavy. My tea had gone cold. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and picked up another stack of papers. Because the truth was clear now. No one was coming to save me, but I could save myself. Paper by paper, memory by memory. At sunrise, I watched the light push across the floor, turning the dark into something softer. I realized then that even though he had taken almost everything, he had underestimated the one thing I still had, my quiet, relentless resolve. And by the time the first birds began to sing outside, I knew I wasn't just fighting for a house or a car. I was fighting for the right to exist on my own terms. And I wasn't going to lose. I woke up that morning with a stiffness in my back that reminded me I wasn't young anymore. But when I shuffled to the bathroom and looked in the mirror, I saw something different. My face was lined and tired, my hair thin in places, but my eyes, they were sharp, alive. For so long, I had believed my softness was my greatest gift, the ability to forgive, to hold the family together with gentle hands and a quiet tongue. But in that reflection, I saw the cost. Every time I swallowed my pain, every time I bent to keep the peace, another small piece of me slipped away. And now, there was no more room for bending. I brushed my hair back, watching my own fingers move with a steadiness I didn't know I still had. I thought of every time I told myself, "It's just easier this way. Let it go." I saw my son's smirk in my mind, that cold, practiced dismissal in his email, "You're old. Just let go." I heard it echo through my ribs, but instead of breaking me, it felt like steel pouring into my bones. I dressed slowly that morning, choosing a pressed blouse I hadn't worn in years. I tucked it in, smoothed it down, and for a moment, I remembered who I used to be before motherhood swallowed me whole. A young woman who had big ideas, who painted her own walls, who saved up for her first car, all on her own. I had loved my son so fully I forgot there was a self before him. Martha knocked softly on the door and peeked in. Her eyes widened. "There you are," she whispered, almost like she was seeing a ghost come back to life. I smiled, the first real smile in weeks. "I have work to do," I told her. She nodded, her eyes shining. "Yes, you do." That day, I called Robert, the lawyer. I told him I was ready to move forward, to file the injunction, to freeze the money from the house sale. My voice didn't tremble once. We spoke for almost an hour, planning, strategizing, preparing for the fight ahead. When I hung up, I stood for a long time in Martha's narrow hallway, staring at my reflection in the old hallway mirror. I thought of my roses, the thorns that protected the blooms, the way they always reached for the sun, even when frost tried to kill them. I wasn't a ghost in my own story anymore. I was a woman reclaiming her ground, one legal document, one memory, one breath at a time. I wasn't fighting him because I hated him. I was fighting because I finally remembered how to love myself. The lawyer called me at dawn. I was sitting at Martha's kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea, my mind running like a freight train through every plan, every what if. "Are you ready?" Robert asked. His voice sounded sharper that morning, like a blade just honed. "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. We filed the injunction to freeze the funds from the sale of the house and the car before he could withdraw or hide them. It felt like pulling a lever on a giant machine. Irreversible, loud in my chest, silent to the world outside. Martha watched me from across the table, her hands wrapped tight around her own mug. When I set the phone down, I looked at her, my heart hammering so hard I thought she could hear it echo through the floorboards. "It's done," I whispered. She stood, walked over, and pressed her forehead to mine like we were two children hiding from a storm. That afternoon, Martha started calling her friends, church ladies, old neighbors, anyone who had seen me during my hospital stay, people who could speak to my state of mind, who could say, she was aware, she was coherent, she was not a woman giving away her life willingly. One by one, they came to the house, bringing pies and hand-me-down casseroles, as if we were planning a wake. But this wasn't a funeral. It was a rising. We sat around Martha's kitchen table. Papers spread everywhere. Their hands were worn and gnarled, their voices sometimes cracked. But every woman who sat there carried a spine made of iron. They remembered the way I used to lead choir rehearsals, organize community dinners, drive sick neighbors to appointments. They remembered the woman I was before the betrayal overshadowed everything. Martha wrote down statements on her yellow notepad as they spoke, her pen moving so fast it looked like a flame flickering in her fingers. I watched them, my heart swelling and breaking all at once, because for the first time in months, I felt the walls of my loneliness start to crumble. I wasn't just an old mother cast aside. I was a woman with a village. By evening, the table was covered in notes and testimonies. My eyes were dry and sharp. No more tears left to give. Before bed, I paused at Martha's front door. I looked out into the quiet night. the stars barely visible beyond the streetlights. Somewhere out there, my son was probably laughing, thinking he had won, that I was just an old ghost too tired to fight. But in that dark doorway, I felt the truth coil inside me like a promise. He had underestimated me for the last time. Tomorrow, he would learn exactly what it meant to betray a woman who had spent her whole life loving in silence, and who had finally decided to love herself more. I barely slept that night. My heart thudded like heavy boots on an empty hallway. I lay in Martha's guest bed, staring at the ceiling as the shadows crawled across it, feeling each hour pass like a cold wave over my skin. At dawn, I stood by the window and watched the sky blush with light. Today was the day. Today, I took my life back. I dressed slowly, carefully. Every button, every fold felt like armor. I pulled on my softest sweater, the one my son used to bury his face into when he was small. I almost tore it off, but I stopped. This was my sweater, my story. I would wear it on my terms. Robert called just after sunrise. "It's filed," he said, his voice sharp, decisive. "The funds are frozen as of this moment." I felt something shift inside me. A dam breaking. A slow, deep exhale I didn't even know I'd been holding. An hour later, there was a pounding on Martha's front door. I didn't need to look. I knew that knock. Martha's eyes flicked to mine. I stood slowly, smoothing my hair back. "It's okay," I said, though my voice came out low and hard. When I opened the door, there he was, my son. His face was red, twisted with fury I had never seen. Or maybe I had, but I had always pretended it was stress, tiredness, anything but what it really was. "You think you can freeze my money?" he screamed before I could even open my mouth. Martha stood behind me, silent but solid as a wall. I stepped forward onto the porch, the morning air sharp in my lungs. My knees wobbled, but I forced them steady. "Yes," I said. My voice was calm, almost too calm. "I can." And I did. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "You're insane. You're old. You don't even know what you're doing." I watched him closely, that boy I had loved so fiercely, the one who used to call me Mama when he skinned his knees. But the man in front of me now, he was a stranger wearing my son's face. I felt no pity, no urge to comfort, only a quiet, cutting clarity. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, "and I will see you in court." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He took one step forward, and Martha moved closer behind me. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes, because he realized I wasn't alone. I wasn't the silent, obedient mother he thought he could manipulate with half-truths and guilt. I was a woman who had found her spine, her voice, and her power, and I wasn't giving them back. He turned, stumbling off the porch, shouting curses that echoed down the street. I watched him go until his figure disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door. Martha pressed a hand to her chest. "You okay?" she whispered. I looked at her, feeling my breath steady, the fire in my belly burning clean and bright. "Yes," I said. "For the first time in my life, I think I really am." After he left, the house felt charged, like a thunderstorm had passed right through the walls. Martha made me tea with trembling hands, but I didn't touch it. I just stood in the hallway, listening to the echo of his curses still bouncing in my chest. Robert called. The court date was set sooner than we thought. I expected fear to rise in me like a tide, but it didn't. What I felt instead was something colder, sharper, like steel sliding into place. The day of the hearing, I dressed in my Sunday best, a navy skirt, the blouse with the tiny embroidery at the collar, the one I wore to baptisms and funerals, to moments when life demanded I show up fully. When I walked into that courtroom, he was already there, slouched in his chair like a bored teenager, eyes flicking to his phone. He looked up and saw me, really saw me, and I watched his face flicker. For a second, he looked like a little boy again, caught red-handed with a broken vase. But it passed. His lips curled into that same mocking smirk. The lawyers spoke in low tones. Papers shuffled. The judge cleared his throat. I sat still, my hands folded neatly in my lap. When my son took the stand, he spoke with dripping charm, talking about misunderstandings, poor communication, how I got confused easily, how he was only trying to protect me from bad decisions. I sat there, stone still, feeling each lie land like small pebbles thrown at my ribs. Then my turn came. I stood slowly, the whole room going silent. My knees shook, but I didn't sit back down. I looked at the judge, then I looked at my son, straight into his eyes. I was not confused, I said, my voice low but steady. I was recovering from surgery. I was vulnerable, but I was not incompetent, and I never agreed to give up my home. A hush swept through the room like a gust of wind. I pulled out my journals, the pharmacy records, the testimony letters from Martha and the other women. Proof of my mind, my presence, my capacity. His lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand, his face hardening as he flipped through the evidence. My son's face turned red, his jaw flexing, fingers drumming on the table. I saw it then, the crack in his arrogance. When the judge announced the injunction would hold, and that my case to contest the sale would proceed, I felt the ground beneath me solidify for the first time in years. I turned to my son one last time. He opened his mouth, maybe to plead, maybe to spit more venom, but I just shook my head. That was the last moment I saw him as my son. I walked out of that courtroom taller than I had felt in decades. Outside, Martha waited, her arms open wide. I fell into them, letting out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. I had finally faced him. And in that cold, echoing courtroom, I reclaimed not just my house but my name. I was no longer the mother who said yes to everything. I was the woman who finally said no, and meant it. When the judge announced the verdict, I felt like my ears were filled with water, everything muffled, slowed, like I was underwater. But then his voice cut through. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. The contested sales are hereby frozen pending full investigation. Power of attorney is revoked effective immediately. A hush fell over the courtroom, as if everyone had forgotten how to breathe. I looked at my son. His face had collapsed in on itself, a mask slipping off, revealing a small, angry boy who thought he could bully his mother into submission forever. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He looked around, searching for someone to rescue him, justify him, love him through this. But there was no one left to do that. I felt the weight slide off my chest all at once. Years of guilt, of bending over backwards, of telling myself, he didn't mean it, he's just stressed. He'll come back to me someday. In that moment, I knew he never would, and I didn't want him to. The bailiff called order, but my son started yelling, "She's lying, she's crazy, you don't know her like I do." His voice cracked on that last part, and for a flicker of a second, I saw the baby he used to be. But it didn't move me. I turned to the judge. "Thank you," I said. My voice was soft but steady. Mine. Entirely mine. Robert guided me out of the courtroom, his hand hovering at my back like I was something precious, something fragile and fierce at the same time. Outside, the July sun was bright and sharp, cutting across the courthouse steps. Martha stood waiting, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands, purple coneflowers, daisies, tiny sprays of baby's breath. She handed them to me, her eyes shimmering. "You did it," she whispered. I held those flowers tight against my chest, petals trembling as much as my hands. "It's over," I said, but she shook her head gently. "No," she said. "It's just beginning." I looked at the people passing by, the cars crawling down the street, the endless sky above. For the first time in years, I felt like I could actually see it all, every color, every edge. My son had looked at me like a door he could push open whenever he wanted. Today, I slammed it shut. I lost a son in that courtroom, but I found something far more sacred, myself. And as I walked down those courthouse steps, flowers in hand, I felt every broken piece inside me start to knit itself back together. I was free. and I would never again trade that freedom for anyone's love. Outside the courthouse, the air felt almost too bright. I stood on the steps with Martha beside me, her hand steady on my arm. We watched as he stormed out, shoving past reporters and onlookers, his face twisted and red. He turned to me one last time, his mouth twisted into a snarl. "You ruined everything," he shouted. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him and felt an odd calm, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you're not afraid of falling anymore. "No," I said, my voice low but clear. "You did that all by yourself." For a moment, his rage flickered into something else, shock, maybe even fear. But it passed as fast as it came. He lunged forward like he wanted to spit more poison, but security stepped in, blocking him with quiet, firm hands. They guided him away, his curses echoing down the courthouse steps. Martha squeezed my arm tighter. "Let him go," she whispered, and I did. I watched his back disappear into the street, and with every step he took away from me, I felt lighter. Robert came out then, shuffling a folder of papers. "We did it," he said simply. I nodded. My knees felt weak, but not from fear, from the release of carrying that heavy silence for too many years. I thought about every dinner where I kept my mouth shut, every birthday when I pretended the tension wasn't there, every time I told myself that being a mother meant endless forgiveness. No more. We went back to Martha's that afternoon. When we got home, neighbors started arriving. One by one, they trickled in, carrying pies and sweet tea, old jars of jam, Southern offerings of comfort. They hugged me tight, some crying, some just holding my hands for a moment too long. They called me brave. They called me strong. But inside, I just felt real, whole. Martha and I sat on the porch as the sun went down, her cat curling up between us. She handed me a glass of lemonade. "What now?" she asked. I stared out at her roses, blooming wild and stubborn along the fence. "Now," I said slowly, feeling each word in my mouth like a prayer. "I take my life back, one small piece at a time." She nodded, her eyes soft with relief and pride. I didn't need my son's approval anymore. Didn't need his presence to make me feel worthy. He left with nothing but his bitterness. And I was left with my freedom, my dignity, and a future that, for the first time in decades, belonged entirely to me. 2 days after court, I went back to the courthouse to finalize paperwork with Robert. I expected it to be quick, signatures, a handshake, a quiet goodbye to that chapter. But as I stepped out onto the sidewalk afterward, he was there, my son. He stood by a lamppost, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes burning holes into me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize. A small, flickering hope rose up in my chest, the last fragile piece of a mother's love. But he opened his mouth, and that hope crumbled before it could even form. "You think you're better than me now?" he hissed. "You think some old papers and a bunch of gossiping neighbors make you strong?" His voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. Passers-by slowed, watching us from the corners of their eyes. I felt my heart thunder once, then settle into a steady beat. I stepped closer, so close I could see the flecks of red in his tired eyes. "I don't think I'm better than you," I said. "I know I am, because I never sold my soul for $1. His face twisted, rage pooling in every line. He lunged, trying to push past me. Maybe to grab me, maybe just to prove he still could. But before he could touch me, 2 courthouse security guards rushed forward, blocking him. He roared, spitting insults, his words tumbling over each other, wild and sharp. I didn't flinch, not once. I looked him in the eyes and felt something inside me click into place, like a lock turning for the final time. "You're no longer my son," I said, my voice almost a whisper, but he heard it. Oh, he heard it. The guard started pulling him back. His curses echoed off the marble walls, bouncing back to him like ghosts. And I stood there, alone but taller than I had ever felt in my life. When the doors closed behind him, the street fell quiet again. I pressed a hand to my heart and felt it, strong, steady, entirely mine. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't feel empty. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. I had given him every chance, every sacrifice, every piece of softness in me. And now I claimed what was left, my peace, my name, my future.